Have you ever heard the airport announcements calling passengers to board a plane, but it wasn't for a trip? This is a one-way, government-funded flight taking people away from the place they once called home. According to numerous official reports, in the US, the government has just declared the quietest border in history, with encounters at a record low. But behind the scenes, ICE facilities are overcrowded, detention centers are packed, and thousands of families are being separated in just a few weeks. And in Europe, media figures show that France deported around 100,000 people in just 1 year, and Germany nearly 60,000, the highest level since World War II. Latvia legalizes pushbacks at the border, while Denmark signs an agreement with Rwanda to process asylum applications remotely. While taxpayers expect Medicare and education for their children and grandchildren. However, hundreds of millions of euros and billions of dollars are flowing into deportation charter flights. The question is this a national defense strategy or an endless spending spiral? And even bigger, is this a display of control or a sign of a system that is already overloaded? The data and information in this video come from official reports and international media. We are not making absolute claims, but are only presenting a picture for everyone to reflect on and discuss together. Let's get started. Can you believe it? In 2025 alone, France deported over 100,000 people. That number is enough to fill nearly 1,300 Boeing 737 flights, each as crowded as a holiday trip to Florida. But this isn't a vacation. It's a one-way ticket, paid for by the government, and no passenger wants to fly. That policy is called zero-tolerance deportation. No papers, asylum denied, criminal record. Get on the plane this week. It sounds more like a logistics chain than a decision involving human lives. On the news, an image that's hard to forget. 50 immigrant camps in Paris, Marseille, and Calais being dismantled. Entire families being put on buses and driven straight to the airport. Some people have lived there for decades, considering France their home. Now the house has become a transit station. And to legitimize this, the government bluntly declared, France must be for the French first. It sounds more like a sales slogan than a national policy. But in the end, why is France tightening up so much? Following the widespread riots in 2024, Parliament passed emergency legislation allowing for mass arrests and rapid deportations. In just the first 6 months of 2025, 15,000 people with criminal records were deported. The majority of the population agrees, with 78% of French people saying the country has become too soft and needs to be tougher. Not stopping there, France also closed asylum applications for Algeria, Morocco, and Afghanistan. Turn back as soon as you arrive. But what few people say, behind security are also budget considerations and political image. The immigrant camp right in the middle of Paris is a blemish on the capital's face. Pushing people out quickly helps the government reduce immediate costs and also shows a strong hand to voters. Does that sound familiar? We in the US have also seen similar scenes. Tax money poured into border walls, charter planes, patrol teams, while no one helps with electricity, healthcare, or neighborhood security bills. I know a family in Ohio where the husband is an air conditioning mechanic. Every evening they turn on the TV to hear news about deportations, while he holds the new, increased electricity bill in his hand. He shook his head. Am I paying taxes so my child can go to university, or so I can buy empty seats on one-way flights in Europe? So the question isn't just whether France can do it. The real question is it state power, or just a temporary bandage on a long-festering economic and social wound? And if France has gone this far, do you think Germany, the giant right next door, will stop? Or will it take this game to a new level? If you've ever sighed in the US about waiting a month at the DMV to get your driver's license exchanged, listen to this story from Germany. Deportation cases now take only 14 days, faster than a mortgage application, even faster than a Medicare application being approved. That's when you see, when the government wants something, administrative procedures suddenly become surprisingly fast. In 2025, Germany deported over 60,000 people, the highest number since World War II. Familiar image: police raid refugee camps, train stations, and even schools. That feeling is hard to swallow. It's like going to Walmart, and before you can even pay for your basket, security pulls you out the door. Along with Berlin, this seems like a way to ease the pressure, as the cost of supporting asylum seekers has risen to 50 billion euros a year. A sum sufficient to build an entire new hospital network, or to alleviate the burden of inflation weighing heavily on the middle class. We, ordinary Americans, also find that scene familiar. When gas and electricity prices rise and pension subsidies have to be cut penny by penny, the government still finds the budget to buy additional charter tickets. German retirees call it cutting bread to buy a plane ticket. And for us, it sounds like sacrificing Medicare to build another wall. What's noteworthy is that Germany is known for its meticulousness and mountains of paperwork. And yet, the land of meticulous processes has now become a drive-through deportation counter. You arrive, place your order, and a few minutes later, the package is on its way. It sounds bitter, but it's true. And this is what makes us think. When procedure becomes a political weapon, who really pays the price? Immigrants are deported, taxpayers remain, and still see their bills skyrocket. So, is Germany protecting society? Or is it just buying more time with the tax money of its own aging citizens? And if Germany has become a drive-through, just wait and see what Sweden, a country once famous for its generosity, will now turn into a clearance sale with its welfare system wiped out. And that story is even more worth discussing. In the past, if you turned on the TV and heard about Sweden, the image in your head was usually a welfare paradise. Free schools, free hospitals, and social benefits so extensive that many Americans would sigh with envy. But 2025 turned that paradise into a welfare liquidation warehouse. The government launched a campaign with a spine-chilling name: Clean Sweden. The plan is very simple. 50,000 people must leave. And who stays without valid documents? No longer having housing, no longer receiving subsidies, no longer having access to medical care? A benefit package that was once given away for free, like Costco samples, is now being withdrawn as quickly as an IRS audit. And I believe many viewers watching the video will wonder, why did Sweden, which once generously opened its doors to over 1 million refugees, change so quickly? A major reason is notable incidents. In 2024 alone, there were approximately 1,300 safety incidents, most of which were linked to gangs in immigrant communities. Ordinary people are tired, just like we used to feel in America. Every time we heard news reports in the press, we felt anxious and uneasy. The Swedish government looked at public opinion polls, saw that people were no longer patient, and decided to turn off the welfare tap. It sounds powerful, but what's the impact? For immigrants, life is suffocated overnight. For society, the generous welfare picture turns into a warning sign: no papers, no rights. And for us Americans who once admired the Nordic model, this story is like discovering that our idols are also paying for electricity in installments just like everyone else. The irony is, a country that once prided itself on caring for outsiders now has to count every penny of aid like a shopkeeper on the verge of bankruptcy. The average American can understand that feeling very well. We've all seen budgets stretched thin and services cut, while politicians make all sorts of promises. The question is, will cutting benefits really quell those worrying incidents? Or will it only drive thousands of people to desperation and destabilize society further? And if Sweden chooses the path of cutting everything to survive, then just wait and see what happens in Finland, where they turn everything into a 48-hour countdown. The scenario will be even more remarkable. You have 48 hours. It's not to pack for a summer vacation, nor is it to prepare for retirement in Florida. 48 hours to leave the country. That's Finland's new policy. Just cross the border without enough paperwork and the clock starts ticking. No lengthy asylum application. No expensive trial process. 2 days later, you were on your way back to the place you had just left. It sounds as cold as a stopwatch in a gym. But this isn't a sports game. This is a government that was once praised for its generous welfare system, but has now become a stopwatch state. And what's the real reason behind that? The Helsinki government believes that the flow of refugees is deliberately crossing the eastern border to cause instability. In response, Finland erected a 200-kilometer fence, equipped it with thermal cameras, drones, motion sensors, and added a 48-hour express deportation law. For many Americans, especially those who once admired Northern Europe as a welfare model, this story sounds both unfamiliar and familiar. Strange because Northern Europe is no longer an open paradise. Familiar because we've heard the exact same arguments before. National security first, humanitarianism later. It's as if welfare, once a source of pride, is now locked away in a safe reserved only for insiders. A friend of mine, who used to be a carpenter in Minnesota, heard this news and chuckled. In Finland, they take 48 hours to process a whole lifetime. In the US, it took me over 6 months to receive my tax refund. Every government has its own speed. It's just a pity that the fastest speed is reserved for pushing people away. The statement sounds bitter, but perhaps it hits the nail on the head. The state can act quickly when they truly want to, but are they using that speed in the right places? So, the question that remains open at this point is, will this countdown clock truly protect Finland, or will it only widen social divisions? And if Northern Europe has chosen to clock in, just wait and see what Central Europe comes up with. Outsourcing humanitarian aid all the way to a territory outside its borders. If Finland chooses to stop the clock for 48 hours, Denmark and Italy play the international shipping game. Outsourcing asylum. It sounds more like a logistics service than humanitarian policy. Denmark signed a contract with Rwanda, and Italy partnered with Albania. Instead of processing asylum applications domestically, they sent tens of thousands of people to offshore centres to be processed on their behalf. To make it easier to understand, imagine it like this. Instead of seeing refugee camps spring up right next to the neighbourhood, the government encapsulates the entire issue, labels the refugees, and then sends them off like an Amazon Prime package. Taxpayers in Copenhagen or Rome won't directly face crowded camps. They'll only see a budget of 1.5 billion euros flowing to Albania or 250 million euros to Rwanda. A sarcastic saying, humanitarian by FedEx. But why did you choose this path? Very simple. Political image. A refugee camp right in the centre of the capital could upset the public and cost votes. And when they push the issue beyond borders, they maintain a tough image domestically while also donning the cloak of international humanitarianism. It sounds sophisticated, but the people still have to dig into their pockets to pay taxes. And if you're American, does this sound familiar to you? For decades, manufacturing, technology, and other jobs have been outsourced to China and Mexico. Now Europe is trying to outsource even asylum. And the question that arises is, when a society begins to treat people as an outsourced service, what does that say about the true value within? A retired uncle in Texas once said, "I used to see companies move their factories to India, and now I hear Europe sending refugees elsewhere." This world really knows how to be creative in avoiding responsibility. It's both funny and heart-wrenching. Do you think this pack and send model will truly make Europe safer? Or will it simply turn the entire continent into VIP customers of a troublesome service? And if not everyone chooses to outsource, look to Eastern Europe, where they built towering steel walls and played the fortress game in a much more straightforward manner. Instead of choosing international shipping like the two countries above, Poland and Latvia built entire fortresses right at their gateways. In Poland alone, the government spent €350 million to build a towering border wall stretching over 400 kilometers along the border with Belarus. Not old-fashioned brick walls, but smart walls, equipped with motion sensors, infrared cameras, and drones that patrol day and night. Latvia went a step further. They legalized pushbacks, meaning if you just stepped over, they would push you back immediately without considering your application or going through any procedures. The border gate is now like a revolving door in a shopping mall. If you take a wrong step, you'll end up back in the right place. Does that sound familiar? For Americans, the debate over a wall or no wall has been a decades-long story. And now, Eastern Europe is almost a carbon copy. They also said the things we've heard before: protect culture, prevent chaos, maintain national security. But in reality, this is a concern stemming from a different conflict. Belarus is accused of using tools to push the flow of people toward the EU in order to cause political instability. Instead of a lengthy debate, Poland and Latvia chose a straightforward approach: build a wall, tighten security, and push back immediately. For us, ordinary Americans, this wall evokes a sense of both familiarity and irony. We were once promised, once the wall is built, everything will stabilize. But bills are still going up, Medicare isn't cheaper, and Walmart is still raising prices. And the Poles and Latvians will eventually have to ask themselves, how high does the wall need to be to block the economic and social pressures within their own countries? A retired friend in Pennsylvania once joked, "They don't build a bridge to the future, they build a wall to the past." A sentence that is both funny and painful because it hits home. Sometimes walls only provide a temporary sense of security without fixing the deeper cracks within. And when Eastern Europe chooses to build walls, look to Southern Europe, where Greece doesn't build steel fences, but enormous detention camps for refugees, with waiting times longer than a New York apartment lease. If you have 48 hours to leave in Finland, the story takes a completely different turn in Greece. 36 months. That's right, 3 years. That's how long an asylum seeker can be detained while waiting for their application to be processed. 3 years sounds like a long-term lease in New York, except you have no choice but to sit and wait in the camp. A family from Syria who crossed the Aegean Sea in fragile boats thought they had reached the gateway to Europe. But instead of freedom, they entered a cycle of waiting. Each day that passes is like an hourglass slowly running out, and no one knows when it will be turned over. The Greeks called this a deterrent, but to those people, it was no different from hurry up and wait. But do you know why Greece is so tough? Partly because they feel the EU is turning them into a buffer state, the first line of defense against the wave of people from the Middle East and North Africa. Since 2015, over 1 million people have crossed through Turkey into Greece. By 2025, the Athens government had had enough. It signed a new agreement with Ankara, accelerated deportations to over 25,000 people per year, and extended detention periods to send a message. Don't come here, you're not welcome. This story reminds me of a retired friend in Florida who complained, "It took almost a year for my Medicare application to be approved, and it was faster in Greece." A half-joking, half-serious saying, but it captures the paradox. When the government truly wants to be slow, they can drag out the process longer than US healthcare, insurance, procedures. So, in the end, who wins this game? Is Greece truly safer, or is it just turning itself into a giant holding pen for all of Europe? And if this is just a buffer, then the next question is, who are the real winners in the push-pull migration game in Europe? Looking at the whole picture, we see an interesting paradox. The US is tightening domestically, while Europe is choosing to tighten at the external border. Washington boasts the quietest border in history, but ICE is overwhelmed, while Paris, Berlin and Rome are sending refugees to Rwanda, Albania, or building towering walls on the Belarusian border. Different in approach, but with the same message. All governments want to prove to voters that they are in control of the situation. What is rarely mentioned is that both sides of the Atlantic are trapped by very similar pressures: aging populations, budget deficits, and voters tired of old promises. We ordinary Americans are already too familiar with the sight of Medicare bills increasing, pensions being insufficient, and Walmart adding a few more cents to the bill. And in Europe, the middle class is also complaining. Welfare is being cut, public services are thinning out, while the state budget is flowing heavily into deportation machinery. Ironically, we pay taxes for healthcare and retirement, but we see our money turn into one-way charter tickets. Those planes take off more frequently than budget domestic flights, the only difference being that passengers never want to return. The big question still hangs in the air. Is this a sign that nations are protecting borders and strengthening security? Or is it merely a symptom of a declining old system trying to buy more time with short-term measures? And if so, where will the next step for both the US and Europe lead? When it comes to immigration and borders, it's easiest to fall into a negative picture. But if you look at it more broadly, you'll see that this is also a lesson in socio-economic management that we ordinary Americans can learn from. Both the US and Europe are spending tens of billions of dollars on border systems, deportations, and detention camps. This number is so large that it could build thousands of schools, hospitals, or reduce the tax burden on retirees. Solution? Demanding more transparency. Every dollar spent on border security needs to be publicly compared to the costs of healthcare, pensions, and infrastructure. Only when voters understand clearly can they oversee effectively. Besides, no one denies the need to control borders, but at the same time, there needs to be a legal, fast, and transparent pathway for migrant workers. The US had the Bracero program in the 20th century, which allowed for controlled immigration to support agriculture. Europe is also currently testing short-term work visas. These are scalable models rather than just shutting down entirely. And don't forget, immigration isn't just a story of who stays and who leaves. It is closely linked to inflation, house prices, and healthcare costs. Viewers can ask themselves, if the billions of dollars budgeted for deportations were reallocated, would electricity bills, Medicare, or student loans be less burdensome? This isn't a dream. It's a practical economic calculation. And finally, every nation is strong when it invests in the future, education, healthcare, and technology. A country that only focuses on pushing people out and forgets to build internal conditions is like a family that only worries about changing the door locks but forgets to fix the roof. We just took a trip around Europe. Common point? Whether in the US or Europe, every government seeks to prove its strength. But amidst the walls, charter flights, and cold regulations, a big question still hangs in the air. Are we truly safer? Or are we just buying a little more time in an aging and strained system? I'd like to hear your opinion. Where do you think the reasonable line is between protecting security and maintaining humanity? Is the US heading down the same path that Europe is experiencing? Please share in the comments. I read every single one, and this is where we exchange ideas, not argue. If you find this video offers a different perspective, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. I will continue to provide frank, easy to understand, but also in-depth analyses of American and global economic, political, and social issues. All the information in this video is compiled from various reports, news sources, and public documents. This is not political or legal advice, but an analysis to provide the audience with additional context and facts. The views shared here are intended to encourage discussion, not to promote extremism or hatred. Because ultimately, the true strength of a society lies not in how high its walls are, but in how well we can talk to and listen to each other.